UCLA is losing some key pieces heading to the portal after they already committed to the Bruins. What's going on for Deshaun Foster and company?
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Check out the Game Time app. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And where we get started today is UCLA. A little over a day ago, on about the 12th and the 13th, the Bruins saw a string of decommits. All right. So the big thing was for the Bruins, all right, they had a big win. Cade Robinson's coming to UCLA. I thought that was a big pickup for UCLA, where they didn't need too many receivers. They'd already brought in a Mikey Matthews, Jadon Wilson. And then next thing you know, you bring in Caden Robinson, and that's an absolutely perfect piece. Now things are falling off for UCLA transfer portal recruiting list. They had at one time 22 commits, and the Bruins have now lost two commits, and they've already committed elsewhere. So what is going on for the Bruins? First, you've got Takiste Crawford, the former Arkansas lineman, coming to UCLA for what would have been his final year of eligibility. Didn't play too many years, or didn't play too much in 2024 in an Arkansas uniform. Came to UCLA. It's like, all right, that's a good pickup for UCLA. It had been at the time one of 5 offensive linemen coming to the Bruins. And instead, the Bruins see him flip and go to West Virginia and follow Rich Rod over there. Rich Rodriguez, who was hired back in Morgantown. So now the Bruins are like, man, that was a pretty good piece in an already evolving offensive line room where you can't just stand to lose players, stand to lose talent that is committed with a new coach that hopefully it would have worked out. Now with him immediately flipping to West Virginia must have been a better fit. Everything going on there, but he wasn't the only one. The other UCLA commit who decommitted was Kaeo Akana. And where did he go? He was a former Utah product, committed to UCLA, and then flipped going to Hawaii. So that probably brought him closer to home, brought him maybe a little more playing time going to Hawaii. And with those guys immediately flipping, it kind of spins things and how my thoughts move into this transfer portal class. Because some of the biggest needs and biggest gets for UCLA were they needed to address the offensive line. They needed to address the defensive line. A lot in the portal, while they've recruited some in the high school recruiting class of 25, getting players on the D line and players in the O line were of the highest importance. And what do they have now? With 20 commits, UCLA has one D lineman, that's Ashton Sanders from Oklahoma. They've got an edge rusher in Nico Devilliers. And then with the others, with the O-line, they've got a couple of tackles, a couple of offensive linemen with Crawford going elsewhere. It's not what you like to see. Where it's one thing if one of these receivers goes elsewhere, okay, I like the receiver room. If even the likes of Anthony Woods goes elsewhere as a transfer, former Utah running back, I think it's a good get for the Bruins. I think the skill positions, they're all right. It's where they need in the trenches, where they were beat up the most in this 2024 season. So the more guys they picked up, the more people they brought in, that's just some big losses. And maybe they don't end up, these two players in Akana or Crawford, maybe they'll end up having immediate impact. But the fact that those two happen back-to-back, and with the ever-evolving recruiting stage, the recruitment is not done. Even if you brought the kid to campus, they've committed. Even if you've got maybe an NIL deal pretty much almost lined in for the certain players that can get big exclusive NIL deals, it's not, you got to re-recruit your own players, re-recruit your own commits. So if I've got my mind correct, this is at least the 5th or 6th decommit from UCLA. We're not including guys who left in the portal. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about players who committed to UCLA in the process of high school recruiting, in the process of transfer portal recruiting, And I think now we're at the 5th or 6th of this 2025 recruiting class. Now, the biggest names were Madden Imeleava, you had Jace Brown, you had the Ohio State now commit and the D-line going elsewhere last minute, but the Bruins did bring in Holland. They brought in a last-minute quarterback to fill that gap potentially in the 25 class. They have 2 quarterbacks coming in and a receiver. In the portal, you're trying to get immediate talent that could compete to start and make a difference for UCLA. And on the D-line, I like what UCLA's been doing these last few years with Akaki Malloy in the foray. The Bruins have been able to churn out and turn players into solid edge rushing players, good players on the D-line. But now you've lost in the last few years, Leatu Latu, you've lost the Murphy twins, you've lost Jay Tuia, just to name a few on that D-line. The Bruins are going through an overhaul. And if you got a guy that could have started coming over from Utah, that's a huge loss. And to beef up one of the worst O-lines in the country at protecting the quarterback with a complicated offense last year, then, man, UCLA is hurting with those guys. And one of the big things I also thought UCLA needed to address before these decommits happened was getting a tight end. I thought Rohan Jones was an excellent target for the Bruins, and they missed out because he immediately signed after going to the portal from his Montana State playing days and went his way to Arkansas. So if you're wondering, hey, how are these guys flipping so quick? There's always backroom deals. You see the coaches that are complaining. You saw former UCLA head coach Jim Moore, the UConn head coach, complaining, calling out teams about, hey, they're calling our players. So some of these players are already committing to UCLA, and then, hey, they're getting calls. Hey, we got a better deal for you. Maybe you're following a coach. Maybe there's a going back home element. Maybe there's an NIL deal in play, and you see a player like Jones, a tight end who's, I think, going on his 3rd school now. I think from Maine to Montana State, if I got that correct. Maybe it's backwards. But from the Bobcats to Arkansas, in the blink of an eye, a snap of the finger, I'm talking about him Sunday, he's going elsewhere. And some of these players, like you'll see like a Carson Beck, will head to the portal, change their options. Maybe you can't go back to your original home, but they have options and they know exactly which places are the best fits and can give them the most money and can give them immediate starting playing time. Well, I thought the Bruins could have been a good fit for Jones if that was the case, but now you've got a decommit, 2 decommits, and a tight end prospect that I thought UCLA, not necessarily that they were in on, could have gone after closer to the West Coast. He's going to the SEC, getting the big money, and will maybe make a big impact with Arkansas. So not a good start to the week for UCLA recruiting. I thought the Robinson news was huge, and then it's kind of gone downhill. Not going to make or break the class, but they've done some very good things so far. And I hope there isn't just a last-second collapse with the new window coming in, with all these playoff players becoming more and more available to the portal because they get the extra chances to stick their name in the transfer portal because their season was still going. I hope that doesn't lead UCLA into a loss of commits. I don't think it would just completely lose 10 to 15. That's not what's going to happen. But the more you lose a 1, 2, or 3 here, that really is like a chip in the armor, a crack in the armor of sorts of your recruiting class, which was seemingly very buttoned up except for 1 or 2 pieces. Now you got to re-recruit players to fill those voids. That was already a weak spot in the last couple of years. Next, we're going to talk about how the ESPN College Game Day crew, mainly the main analyst Jay Billis, was calling out Mick Cronin. That was even prior to the Rutgers loss, about his comments with this team being soft and delusional. Everybody's calling out Cronin. We'll talk about that next on Locked On UCLA. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff games, they're incredible experiences, and they can bring fans together like never before. I can remember going to past playoff games, whether it be college football, any other sport as well. And I can't wait to make memories with these new formats, new teams. Game Time, though, if you want to get those tickets for in the future, all those big events, Game Time Picks is where you go to get your tickets for great deals, great seats, and you filter out all that fluff of having to go between multiple places. What's the best place? Go to Game Time. Because I've used it recently to find myself tickets for games that I went to across the country in my own backyard. Anything with Game Time. You toggle in the all-in pricing feature, you know what you're paying, and they give you the best deals, the zone deals, to give you some of the cheapest finds across all the ticketing industry. So check out Game Time and check out the app. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Use the code, create an account, LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Mick Cronin has made his headlines, of course, for calling out his players and getting crazy angry when his team is not having a lot of success. Well, now we sit here with UCLA having lost so many in a row, 4 in a row. They're now 11-6, 2-4 in Big Ten play. They haven't won a team game against a new Big Ten team since the new year. The Rutgers loss being the latest, most just heartbreaking one to watch, because that was a game I thought the Bruins could get back on track and win. No. And one of the big things I saw over the weekend heading into that Rutgers game was how even the College Game Day crew, which they have for college basketball on ESPN, Jay Billis, the head analyst, was out there critiquing, giving his thoughts, calling out Mick Cronin. So even some of the greatest minds, the biggest analysts, and the majority of the crew, like Jay Williams, like Seth Greenberg, Jay Williams, and Jay Billis, all out there talking, hey, this was not the right move. And I talked in the most recent episode of Locked On UCLA where Cronin, when he calls out his players and has big-time tirades, can get the best out of his players in recent years, and it's led from success from 1920 into the 23-24 season, varying levels of success immediately. Well, since Cronin has called out his team, it's been back-to-back dismal performances. Now, there's a lot of off-the-court factors with this too, but even that crew also admitted, the game day crew talked about, hey, yes, they acknowledge that. But it seems like there is two sectors here. People who agree with Cronin, or the brightest, biggest minds who are like, Cronin spoke his voice, he is always going to do that, should have done that behind closed doors as opposed to going through the media to do that. And that's an interesting aspect, right? Where does hard coaching versus calling out your players draw the line? And now it's even a lot tougher because these are they're not amateur athletes anymore. They're making money. Like, they're making lots of money. All these players that came in, whether they were recruited, like the Trent Perrys, the transfers, they're making healthy NIL income for the most part, right? More than they ever would have been. The hype was, which I brought in and I contributed to the hype train, but a lot of people were with me, UCLA talking heads or such, that this team was going to be much better. They've proved it. They've got quite a few quad 1 wins already, where heading into the year, this team was already into the new year, was already NCAA tournament solidified. And I was like, if they don't collapse, they're guaranteed to be in the tournament. Well, they're on the brink of a collapse. And Cronin went out, used his magic idea of blowing up the team publicly through the media. And it has not worked so far. The game day comments I'm talking about, the Jay Billises of the world, that was in between the Rutgers-Maryland game. And now they've tacked on another loss to that. What can UCLA do, hopefully with some home cooking, even though they're playing Iowa at home, and it's still necessarily a guarantee they can win that game, or being at home is going to resolve everything with what's going on in Los Angeles right now. There is so much turmoil for UCLA on the court that how are they going to fix it in practice, right? The defensive side of things, Cronin challenged their toughness. Well, there's something wrong between him challenging his coaching staff, his players that he all brought in there, and it hasn't worked so far in these last 2 games. 2 tough road games, I'll admit, having to go all the way across the country, but some dismal performances on the defensive end in games where UCLA, if they don't give up 50 points and a half pretty much, remember, heading into the new year, UCLA gave up close to 55 points a game, and there's been multiple halves of basketball they've played this year in 2025 where they've almost given up what they give up per game in a single half, or it could have been more if the other team wanted to score more. That's been a big problem for UCLA. And the other eyesore is the playground offensive basketball that they continue to employ, they continue to run, and it's just not worked out. I know sometimes they're missing shots. They have to hit threes. It just doesn't always look like there's something in place with the Bruins playing on the offensive half. Like, what are they doing? I know I'm not a bright basketball mind, but even I can see, what do they run half the time? Sebastian Mack ISO for 30% of the game is not always going to work. Now, you need those guys who can attack and get to the bucket, but we saw how that worked last year. It didn't, at least not the whole time, or when Mack was successful, it got coached up and game planned for by the opponent, and Mack was less successful, although he did have the bad toe injury, for the rest of the year. And he doesn't shoot well enough to push the defenders too close to him where he can go blow past them, blow by them. They can sag off and help and force him to kick it out. And the Bruins, I think Cronin noted this after the Gonzaga game and into the Nebraska game, shot better than 40%, 42% or so from three. Because they can shoot. Don't compare these two teams from last year, this year. If you think this team is one of the worst shooting teams of all time, they are in a slump, but they are nowhere near last year's team in terms of shooting. They are much better. They have more players. They are better. What makes this so interesting is Cronin called out his team much louder because he knows this team has something. That is why he went to such extremes to call out the coaches, call out his players, because he believes this team is a lot more special than last year's team. He talked so many times about the 23-24 team that they need me. I need to coach them. They're young. They got to coach, got to truly coach. This is one of those years where Cronin doesn't succeed. He's pivoted multiple times on his recruiting strategy. He got the money this year. And if this doesn't work, that is kind of, all right, that seat's getting a little warm. I'm not trying to say something crazy here, but it isn't looking like the best situation if UCLA crumbles to finish and doesn't do the big things that were expected of them this year. Because they got the things that they didn't have last year, the NIL support. They got the players in the shooting, some defensive players, and it hasn't panned out. They've got some big wins. They got the quad one wins. You can't go in there and say this team hasn't proved anything. They proved it. They got big wins over Arizona, at Oregon. Should have beat North Carolina, beat Gonzaga, and held them to under 70, where something's just wrong now. That is why Cronin went to such extremes to call out his team the way he did this early so they could figure it out. Now, it's been a rough go at it right now for UCLA. Absolutely. Rough go of it. It was interesting timing after the Michigan game. Off the court, yes, but on the court, Michigan is just, again, a bad mismatch for UCLA. I'm glad they only played once because they played twice and had to go to Ann Arbor. I think Michigan would beat them by another 15 points. It's one thing in the postseason scenario, but if it was a regular season game in Ann Arbor, I think they would also beat UCLA again by 10 to 15 points unless the Bruins forced 25 turnovers, which they weren't doing against their 2 7-footers. It's a bad mismatch. But to question the toughness, the team hasn't shown up yet. And if it's staying at home for an extended stint, being on the West Coast for the next 2-3 weeks, that is hopefully what it means. Maybe it's not necessarily a win versus Iowa, but how everybody's called them out, it's now for the team to respond. From game day to the fans, you guys listening, even me just wondering, man, this team everybody's calling out, whether it's the play, Cronin, both, everything mixed in. It's time to respond. And with the Hawkeyes coming to town, playing SC, so they're already in California, and UCLA still recovering from being in the East Coast for close to a week and then landing, maybe they can figure out how this travel schedule works because they're on an NBA travel schedule. And Cronin has pushed them to the limit like a college coach with a big ego, with a big, loud, demonstrative personality, commanding the respect, trying to command the respect and the effort of his team, which hasn't come cohesively on the defensive side or the offensive side yet. They're still finding the right lineup, and nothing has worked. And the longer this goes on, the more the outcries, the louder the calls for Cronin's job will become. As asinine as it might have been a few weeks ago, it can turn in a second. But as Cronin always says, it's how you do in the NCAA tournament. And that is how we can save this second half of the season. The last third of the season and the postseason is how we can save it, and we can forget this 2 to 3 week stretch, hopefully. But in the moment, maybe the only one soft and delusional right now is Mick Cronin trying to get his team fired up. But until then, the Bruins have a lot of work to do. Speaking of a lot of work to do, the UCLA women's basketball team, they're going to go on a big, epic road trip soon. And they're not even playing at home this next game. What's going on when they play Penn State? We'll talk about that next on Locked On UCLA. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. And I always find that the decluttering and the refreshing my space helps me get back into that routine that's going to be so tough after the holiday season, whether you're into tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start this year in 2025. Wayfair has everything you need, all within your budget. You can look for furniture, huge selection that makes it easy to find pieces that can fit your style and budget with Wayfair. They've got free and hassle-free delivery, even for the larger items. And with the site that's super easy to navigate, you can find everything you want in no time. And there's something for every style and every home, and you can tackle your New Year's home goals. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's Wayfair, Wayfair.com. Wayfair.com. Every style, every home. All right, so we're wrapping up this Locked On UCLA pod. The Bruins, on the women's side, the number one ranked Bruins, undefeated, unbeaten. They're dominated, unquestioned, having dominated the number 2 team in the country earlier in the year by beating down South Carolina at Pauley Pavilion. They're on the road of sorts. They are hosting a game, the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, in Long Beach at the Walter Pyramid. All right. So the Bruins will be taking on the Penn State Lady Lions in a unique venue in Long Beach at the Pyramid, where they're taking on Penn State. So I wonder how that's going to look, how the fan support's going to go. Obviously, it's not too far. There's UCLA fans literally everywhere, and I hope they go show up to Long Beach. It's going to be a 6:30 tip on January 15th, so pretty shortly after we post this pod. The Bruins, they should dominate Penn State. I wonder how they're going to come out. The one thing that does help this situation in terms of the gameplay in this arena, on this court, UCLA has already made that trip. They've already played there, and they dominated there. They dominated. So they know how the Walter Pyramid plays. It's a unique venue. If you've never been, I highly encourage you to go to the Walter Pyramid, one of my favorite arenas and venues in all of sports, in all of America. Very unique. And heck, it's painted blue, for goodness sakes. If there's ever a place to go wear UCLA blue, hey, the Pyramid, it's painted blue. Go wear your blue and gold. The Bruins, though, to take on Penn State, this should be a beatdown. Coming up next, though, UCLA, and I wonder what this game being moved. The media after the game did ask Mick Cronin if the men's game is in any jeopardy. The UCLA campus is fully remote through Friday because the Chancellor, Julio Frank, who is dealing with the ongoing fire situation, is trying to make sure campus is a safe place. So they negotiated having this UCLA game moved to Long Beach. And this is already after Northwestern canceled their trip. So I wonder if Northwestern, because Northwestern was the one that canceled their trip west. They didn't want to play UCLA or SC and come west to Los Angeles. We've already seen the Rams go win in Arizona to take down the Vikings. We've seen games be postponed, but the Lakers have come back. The Clippers have come back. We're seeing games that were maybe not postponed, but they're coming back in Los Angeles. So Northwestern canceled that game. The Penn State game got moved. And, the UCLA campus, with a bad day weather-wise, they're still trying to keep everybody away from campus, keep it at the highest, the safest place possible. So I wonder if there will be a game moved, postponed, change of venue for the UCLA men, if that's on the table. That hasn't been talked about. But considering the women's game is in Long Beach now, that's something to take care of or look at. However, UCLA should dominate this game and win this by 30 to 40 points. After Penn State, this is where things get interesting. They go from the LA area and they get away. So while the men's team might need to come home and just be at home for a while, the women's team, I think, is getting away for 3 games. Mind you, they added the Baylor game. They announced the Baylor game late for the Coretta Scott King Classic on Monday, January 20th. It's a noon tip. So they're going to go out east. They're going to play 3 games against Baylor, against Rutgers in Maryland. Baylor will be the toughest of these next few games. I still think UCLA should win that one by double digits. They play Rutgers on the road in Piscataway, and I'm assuming, hopefully, they can sell that arena out. They've been selling out for the men's side quite a bit. The Bruins play a Thursday game, and then Sunday. So UCLA gets this game Wednesday against Penn State, and with Northwestern canceling or postponing the game at the moment, that gives UCLA a long, extended rest to prepare, stay sharp, hopefully beat down Penn State, and then that next stretch, 3 games in 7 days, right? That's Big Ten Conference Tournament. That's almost March Madness-esque. Nothing like a conference tournament, though, where you play 3 games in 5 or 6 days. They played 3 games in a row in Hawaii, and the Bruins looked progressively worse, tired, and more sloppy as the weekend went on. Just look at the stats. You see how they turned it over. Now, Corey Close did change up the lineup, so you see different things, but wasn't the most crisply played basketball when they played 3 days in a row in Hawaii against teams they were big-time favorites over, like 25-point favorites. When they went to Hawaii and played Hawaii, Fresno State, UT Martin, UCLA had to pull away from Hawaii late, right? This was a 1-point game or a very close game, 1-score game heading into the third quarter before the Bruins pulled away from the Rainbow Wahine in the third quarter. It was very, very close before the Bruins won by 21. That's what I'm worried about with this upcoming trip to the East Coast. UCLA added the non-conference game in the middle of the day Monday for Baylor. They got Rutgers, and then they got a Sunday game. So the Bruins do get that Friday, Saturday off, but they play an early game, 11 a.m. body clock time on Sunday morning against Maryland, who is one of the best teams in the Big Ten, one of the best teams in the country. And the good thing for UCLA is they go play Maryland, and then they get another week off. They get a full week before they host Minnesota. And I think what's interesting for the UCLA women, this schedule is much easier to navigate travel-wise than it is for the men. Now, mind you, the women have gone to Paris, they've gone to San Francisco, they've gone to Hawaii, they're going to go to the East Coast. They added a game on the East Coast when they already had 2 games scheduled. They're like, let's just play Monday. Let's play 3 times in like 6 days. And then they're going to be on the West Coast until the end of February. So for the women, they have 1 trip east. They get 3 games worth, 1 very tough game, a solid game, and an expected blowout. And then the Bruins don't go east until the end of February, until the Super Bowl has come and gone, until the big game has happened, until the football season's over. So I think they got the benefit of the doubt. They have 1 East Coast trip left after this upcoming one, but it's the toughest. And with Maryland being the end of that, I wonder how much UCLA will be. It means they'll be hopefully focused for those next 3 games, but Maryland will be rocking. I'm expecting close to a solid, if not a packed-out house for the Terrapins against the Bruins because they brought the energy when they played USC. And then eventually, come the 13th, near Valentine's Day, is when UCLA is going to go to USC in a game in the Galen Center that will be packed out, and we'll finally see the true test UCLA's been waiting. Well, Maryland will be one, but we've all been waiting to see Juju Watkins, Lauren Betts step on the court again and battle it out just like it was an epic classic in the Pac-12 tournament semifinal a year ago. We're waiting for those same battles here in Los Angeles once, twice, and maybe a third time in the conference tournament or the NCAA tournament. Women, they're going to have at least 3 more wins, I think, before their next truly close game, which puts them close to 19-0. Might get them to a 20th win. Now, anything's possible in the Big Ten. Minnesota's very good. They're coming west to UCLA after a long trip. Some tough slip-ups potential. But Maryland, after a long road trip with the Bruins heading away, could be good for the women. We'll see how that goes for the UCLA side. But they should beat up Penn State and hopefully do so in the Walter Pyramid, where they could be 2-0 in the Walter Pyramid. Until then, we'll talk more UCLA sports. We'll talk basketball, any more Cronin quotes, football recruiting updates, all that and more here on Locked On UCLA. So like, comment, subscribe, download the episodes. Thanks for your support. This has been Locked On UCLA. Hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA. Fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.